Welcome to Once Upon English.
He was the boy who never quite fit in. While others saw the world in colors, he saw it in shadows, and somehow turned those shadows into magic. From a lonely kid sketching monsters in his bedroom to one of the most iconic filmmakers in history. Hey, my friend, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into the wonderfully weird world of Tim Burton, a man who turned darkness into art and imagination into legacy.
The master of the macabre enter the world of Tim Burton. In a world often flooded with formulaic storytelling and polished perfection, there stands a cinematic mind that thrives in the shadows, dances with the eerie, and paints the strange with poetic elegance. That mind belongs to Tim Burton, a visionary whose name has become synonymous with the beautifully bizarre. From towering Gothic castles to pumpkin-filled wonderlands, Burton has crafted universes that feel both haunting and heartwarming, like fairy tales whispered in the dark. But behind the pale faces of characters like Edward Scissorhands, Jack Skellington, and Beetlejuice lies the story of a deeply imaginative child from suburban California. A boy who felt like an outsider, a teenager who found comfort in horror films and expression in lonely sketches, a man who turned his sense of alienation into a signature art style that would captivate millions. This is not just a story of Hollywood fame or box office numbers. This is the tale of an artist who rejected the mainstream and carved a path for those who see beauty in the odd and soul in the shadows. It's about love, loss, loyalty, and the lifelong pursuit of artistic truth. From the dark corners of his imagination to the glowing screens of the world, Tim Burton has changed the way we dream. So, settle in, because the story you're about to hear, like his movies, is anything but ordinary. The Outsider in Burbank, Tim Burton's Strange Beginnings, 1958 to 1976. Timothy Walter Burton was born on August 25, 1958, in the sunny and seemingly ordinary town of Burbank, California. On the surface, Burbank was the epitome of American suburbia. Rows of similar houses, neatly cut lawns, and a community that valued conformity. Ironically, Burbank was also home to the bustling world of Hollywood studios, including Warner Brothers and Disney, just a few miles from Burton's childhood home. But for young Tim, the proximity to fantasy did little to make reality feel magical. He was a quiet, introspective child, often lost in his own thoughts. Unlike other kids who thrived in sports or social activities, Tim gravitated toward solitude. He found companionship not in people, but in his vivid imagination. He'd draw monsters, aliens, and ghosts, while other kids drew football players or cartoons. He felt like an outsider, and he liked it that way. His relationship with his parents was distant, particularly with his father, Bill Burton, who worked for the city's Parks and Recreation Department. His mother, Jean Burton, owned a cat-themed gift shop, quirky in its own right, and perhaps the only adult who understood even a little of his eccentric ways. At a very young age, Tim developed an intense love for classic horror films, especially those from the 1930s and 1940s. He was obsessed with actors like Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi. The black and white world of Gothic castles, lightning storms, misunderstood creatures, and haunted souls fascinated him deeply. But what fascinated him wasn't the fear, it was the empathy. He didn't see monsters as villains. He saw them as misunderstood outcasts, echoes of his own inner world, soft, strange, and seeking connection. Films like Frankenstein and Dracula weren't horror stories to him, they were love letters to loneliness. Tim would spend hours in his room drawing creatures with bulging eyes, crooked smiles, and towering heads. His sketchbooks were filled with skeletons in suits, stitched together animals, and children with wide, sad eyes. His art was not only unusual, it was unapologetically unique. School was another realm of discomfort. Teachers didn't quite understand him. Fellow students thought he was weird or creepy. Tim wasn't disruptive, but he was distant, always lost in thought, doodling on the margins of his notebooks or writing stories in the backs of his textbooks. He wasn't interested in academic subjects, except for art, literature, and sometimes science fiction. He didn't care for popularity, prom, or parties. What he loved was Halloween, the one day when everyone dressed as monsters and he felt normal. Even as a teenager, he began experimenting with homemade films. Using an 8mm camera, he created short stop-motion animations using clay figures and puppets. These films were rough, but they carried the first sparks of his cinematic voice, dark, whimsical, and emotionally tender beneath the eerie surface. Believe it or not, one of his first successes came at the age of 13 when he entered and won a local poster contest. The theme was anti-littering, and young Tim's submission, showing a garbage monster made of trash, was both clever and grotesque. It got him attention. Some people laughed. Some were disturbed. Tim was proud. This tiny victory gave him a taste of what it meant to speak through images, to express feelings and ideas that couldn't be said aloud. Perhaps the most defining moment of his youth was his growing admiration for Vincent Price, the suave, melancholic actor known for his roles in Gothic horror films. Price's voice, demeanor, and tragic presence resonated deeply with Burton. Later in life, this admiration would come full circle in a beautiful and emotional way. But we'll get to that in time. Art school rejection and the Disney days, 1976 to 1984. As Tim Burton approached adulthood, one thing became crystal clear. He wasn't going to follow a traditional path. He wasn't going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant. He wasn't even sure if he could be a normal artist because his work was too odd, too emotional, too Tim. But there was one place where he could let his eccentricities blossom: California Institute of the Arts, or CalArts as it's more commonly known. Founded by Walt Disney himself, CalArts was unlike any other school. It was designed to be a playground for the imagination, and that's exactly what Tim needed. He enrolled in 1976, entering the school's animation program, a rigorous, hands-on environment where students were expected to draw for hours every day, learn storytelling, master character design, and understand the mechanics of motion. But while other students were drawing cheerful talking animals, Burton's sketchbooks were filled with creatures that had sunken eyes, elongated limbs, and an air of tragic elegance. His characters weren't dancing mice. They were ghosts, skeletons, or little misunderstood children with too large heads and too small bodies. Still, he thrived in that environment. He didn't have to explain why he felt the way he did. He didn't have to hide the darkness in his work. At CalArts, for the first time, his imagination wasn't a problem. It was a gift. During his years at CalArts, Tim created several short films. One of the most notable was Stalk of the Celery Monster, a grotesque, surreal, and strangely humorous animation that showcased his bizarre visual style and love for horror tropes. That short caught the attention of Disney recruiters. Yes, that Disney, the land of princesses, happy endings, and singing animals. They didn't quite know what to make of Tim Burton, but they saw talent, raw, untamed, and visually compelling. In 1979, Burton joined Walt Disney Animation Studios as an apprentice animator. On paper, it was a dream come true, working for one of the biggest studios in the world. But the reality was far more complex. Burton was assigned to work on films like The Fox and the Hound, 1981, and The Black Cauldron, 1985. These were beautiful, well-constructed projects, but they didn't speak to Tim's soul. The tone was too light, the style too conventional. Tim didn't blend in. His ideas were too dark, his characters too weird, his stories too sad. At one point, Disney executives even said his work was too scary for kids. Yet somehow they didn't let him go. Instead, they put him in a small studio room and gave him space to explore his own ideas, unofficially, of course. And out of that creative isolation came some of Burton's earliest masterpieces. In 1982, Tim Burton created a black-and-white stop-motion short called Vincent. It was just over 6 minutes long, but it captured his artistic soul better than anything he'd done before. The short film told the story of a young boy named Vincent Malloy, who dreams of being like his hero, Vincent Price. The boy lives in a surreal Gothic dream world, where he conducts mad science experiments and wanders his home like a tortured poet. Vincent Price himself narrated the film, a deeply emotional moment for Burton. His childhood idol, the very voice that comforted him through lonely nights, was now speaking the words he had written. Vincent wasn't a commercial product. It wasn't made for profit, but it became an underground hit. People in the animation world took notice. Tim Burton was now officially a visionary with his own language. Encouraged by the success of Vincent, Disney allowed Burton to direct a short live-action film, Frankenweenie. The story? A young boy brings his dead dog back to life using electricity, a clear homage to Frankenstein, but through the lens of childhood grief, love, and imagination. The film was tender, spooky, and emotionally rich. But once again, Disney executives were nervous. They deemed it too scary for kids and shelved it, firing Burton in the process. It was a harsh blow. Tim was fired by Disney for being too himself. But this rejection turned out to be the best thing that could have happened, because what Disney saw as too strange, others began to see as brilliantly original. Breakthrough with Pee-wee, Beetlejuice, and Batman. 1985 to 1989, Tim Burton was 26 years old. He'd been fired from Disney. He had 2 short films, Vincent and Frankenweenie, both beautiful, both misunderstood. He had no job, no clear future. But what he did have was a style, a signature, a voice, and the world was finally beginning to listen. The first real opportunity came from a surprising place. Paul Rubens, the creator of the bizarre, childlike character Pee-wee Herman. Rubens had seen Burton's Frankenweenie and was captivated. He loved the weirdness, the tone, the sincerity wrapped in Gothic surrealism. He reached out to Tim and offered him something huge: direct a feature film. This was a massive leap. Tim had never directed a full-length movie before, but Rubens believed in his vision. And so, in 1985, with a modest budget and a wild script, Tim Burton made Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It was bizarre. It was hilarious. It had stop-motion dinosaurs, strange dream sequences, and Tim's love for outsider heroes. and it was a massive hit. The film was released in August 1985 and made over $40 million, far more than expected. Critics loved its boldness, its originality, and its cartoonish flair. Suddenly, Tim Burton was no longer the weird kid in the corner. He was a director to watch. And then came the real test. Tim's next film wasn't just weird, it was downright outrageous. Beetlejuice was the story of a recently deceased couple, a haunted house, and a crude, chaotic ghost for hire named Beetlejuice, played by a wild and unhinged Michael Keaton. Burton pitched the idea to Warner Brothers, and somehow, miraculously, they said yes. But the studio had concerns. The tone was too dark. The humor was too grotesque. The lead character was barely likable. Tim didn't care. He followed his gut. The result? A cult masterpiece. Beetlejuice was released in 1988 and became a pop culture phenomenon. It earned over $75 million, won an Academy Award for Best Makeup, and introduced audiences to Burton's unique aesthetic in full bloom. Twisted landscapes, claymation-style effects, and characters that were both funny and tragic. It was creepy, quirky, and deeply heartfelt beneath the surface. And the industry was paying attention. After Beetlejuice, Warner Brothers approached Tim with something massive. Would you like to direct a Batman movie? This wasn't a joke. They wanted Tim Burton, the guy who got fired from Disney, to reboot one of the most beloved superheroes of all time. But this Batman wouldn't be like the 1960s version in tights. No more cop-how or silly one-liners. Burton envisioned a dark, gothic Gotham filled with shadow, trauma, and mystery. He cast Michael Keaton, the same actor who played Beetlejuice, as Bruce Wayne. Fans revolted. They sent thousands of protest letters to the studio. But Tim stood firm. He knew Keaton had the intensity, the duality, the quiet sorrow that defined Batman. Then he cast Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and that changed everything. With a budget of $35 million, Burton built an entirely new Gotham City from scratch. A world where everything felt stylized, symbolic, and almost nightmarish. The perfect blend of comic book fantasy and psychological depth. Batman was released in June 1989, and it exploded. The film made over $400 million worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing movies of its time. It redefined the superhero genre, proved comic book films could be dark and dramatic, and made Tim Burton a household name. The once misunderstood animator was now one of Hollywood's most sought-after directors. By the end of the 1980s, Tim Burton had directed 3 hit films, each wildly different, yet unmistakably his. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, quirky and surreal. Beetlejuice, gothic and comedic. Batman, dark, epic, and operatic. He had defied the odds, he had taken risks, and he had proven that there was a massive audience for his brand of storytelling. But he wasn't done, not even close.
Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and the birth of Burton's cinematic universe, 1990 to 1993. This was the period where Tim Burton wasn't just popular anymore, he was iconic. His vision was now reshaping how the world saw fantasy, darkness, and emotion all at once.
After the mega success of Batman, Tim Burton was at the top of Hollywood. He could have chosen any project, any big sequel, any big budget. But instead, he chose something intimate, something quiet, something deeply personal. He wanted to make a story that reflected his own loneliness, his childhood, the feeling of being different, misunderstood, like a monster with a poet's soul. That story became Edward Scissorhands. Tim had been working on the concept for years. A strange boy created by an inventor, left unfinished with scissors for hands, living in a castle above a perfect pastel suburb. The boy tries to fit in, but is rejected because of his differences. It was a fairy tale, a romance, a tragedy, and a metaphor, all in one. There was only one actor Tim trusted for the role, Johnny Depp. Depp had been a teen heartthrob on 21 Jump Street, but he wanted more. He wanted real acting, real stories, and Edward was the role that would change his life. Tim and Johnny formed a deep creative bond. Depp understood Edward instinctively. He barely spoke in the film, yet his performance was hauntingly emotional, fragile, lost. Winona Ryder played Kim, the girl who sees Edward for who he truly is. Danny Elfman composed the score, a gorgeous, magical symphony that would become one of the most beloved film soundtracks of all time. When Edward Scissorhands hit theaters in December 1990, audiences were stunned. It wasn't a blockbuster, it was something poetic. It made over $85 million, but more than that, it became a modern myth, a cultural touchstone. It touched people's hearts. This was no longer just the guy who made Batman. This was Tim Burton, the visionary, the storyteller. After Edward Scissorhands, the studios wanted more Batman. The first film had been a monster success, and Warner Brothers begged Tim to come back. But he had one condition: I'll do it my way. And so began Batman Returns, a film much darker, much more stylized, and far more Burton-esque than the first. Gone was the usual hero-villain plot. In its place, a story of three broken souls. Batman, haunted by loneliness. The Penguin, a grotesque outcast seeking revenge, played by Danny DeVito. And Catwoman, a shy woman reborn as a seductive anti-hero, played masterfully by Michelle Pfeiffer. The movie was filled with twisted beauty, from snowy Gotham streets to surreal circus gangs. It wasn't just a superhero movie, it was art, but the film shocked parents. It was too dark, too sexual, too weird. McDonald's even pulled their Happy Meal tie-ins. Still, the movie made $266 million, and critics praised its ambition. Burton had proven that blockbusters didn't have to be safe. They could be bold, emotional, and even painful. And once again, Johnny Depp and Danny Elfman were waiting in the wings. By 1993, Tim had a repertory of collaborators, people who understood his vision, his rhythm, his heart. Johnny Depp, the soulful outsider. Winona Ryder, the misunderstood romantic. Danny Elfman, the musical voice of Tim's inner world. Rick Heinrichs and Colleen Atwood, his production designer and costume designer, shaping his gothic style. Together, they were building what fans would call the Burtonverse, a cinematic world full of spiral hills, lonely heroes, and poetic monsters.
The Nightmare Before Christmas, Ed Wood, and the Rise of a Cult Icon, 1993 to 1996. At this point, Tim Burton wasn't just a director, he was a movement, a new kind of artist, a poet of the weird. And now, he was about to venture into something truly magical, something made from cloth, clay, and pure imagination.
Tim had the idea for The Nightmare Before Christmas way back in the early 1980s, inspired by a simple moment when he saw Halloween decorations being taken down and Christmas decorations going up. The contrast sparked a wild idea. What if Halloween tried to take over Christmas? Tim wrote a poem. He sketched dozens of characters. But for years, no one wanted to make it, until Disney finally said yes. But there was a twist. Tim wouldn't direct it. He was too busy with Batman Returns, so he handed the reins to his trusted collaborator, Henry Selick. Still, everything about the film screamed Burton. The character designs, the twisted humor, the lonely main character searching for meaning in a world he doesn't belong. That character was Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King of Halloween Town who stumbles upon Christmas Town and decides to borrow the holiday, with disastrous and beautiful results. It took 3 years of stop-motion animation. Over 227 puppets were built, and Danny Elfman didn't just compose the music. He voiced Jack's singing voice, pouring his soul into every lyric. When it released in October 1993, critics were amazed. But the movie wasn't a smash hit at first. It was too strange, too gothic, too Tim Burton. But over the next few years, something incredible happened. The film became a cult classic, then a mainstream classic, then a generational masterpiece. Merchandise, concerts, tattoos, theme park rides. It grew and grew. And Tim Burton became something even greater, a cultural icon. After Nightmare, Tim shocked everyone by choosing his next film, a black and white drama about Ed Wood, considered the worst director of all time. But to Tim, Ed wasn't a joke. He was a dreamer, a believer, a man who loved movies so much he made them, even if no one else thought they were good. Burton saw himself in Ed. He brought back Johnny Depp to play the lead, and Depp gave one of the most joyful, sincere performances of his career. The film was touching, funny, and utterly unique. It featured Martin Landau as Bela Lugosi, the aging horror legend, a role that earned Landau an Academy Award. Although Ed Wood didn't make much money, it won critical acclaim, 2 Oscars, and proved that Burton could do more than fantasy. He could do heart. By 1995, Tim Burton's influence could be felt everywhere. Goth culture, inspired by him. Hot Topic, stocked with his art. Young filmmakers, all citing him as their role model. His name alone could sell a movie. And yet, he wasn't content to stay in the same place. He wanted to go weirder, bolder, louder, and that led him to his most chaotic film yet. Mars Attacks, Sleepy Hollow, and The Return to Gothic Horror, 1996 to 1999. After the emotional sincerity of Ed Wood, Tim Burton veered into total absurdity with a project that no one saw coming. A wild, chaotic, B-movie-inspired alien invasion film called Mars Attacks. Based on a set of bizarre 1960s trading cards, the movie was part parody, part tribute to cheesy sci-fi films, and entirely Burton. It had a stacked cast: Jack Nicholson in 2 roles, Glenn Close, Pierce Brosnan, Sarah Jessica Parker, Danny DeVito, Tom Jones, yes, the singer, Natalie Portman, and the aliens. They were grotesque CGI Martians with huge brains and nasty attitudes. They didn't want peace. They wanted to destroy everything and laugh while doing it. That ridiculous alien war cry became iconic. Critics were divided. Some loved the satire. Others were baffled. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. But years later, Mars Attacks found its own cult following, especially among those who understood Tim Burton's sense of humor, bizarre, irreverent, and full of secret meaning beneath the madness. Then, in 1999, Tim returned to the genre that made him famous: Gothic horror. He adapted Washington Irving's classic tale, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but he didn't just retell the story, he reinvented it. This version of Sleepy Hollow was dripping with fog, blood, superstition, and beauty. It was a world where trees bled, shadows whispered, and nothing was quite as it seemed. Johnny Depp returned, this time as Ichabod Crane, not a gangly schoolteacher, but a scientific investigator sent to uncover the truth behind a string of murders committed by a headless horseman. The visuals were stunning, the atmosphere was chilling, and the film won an Academy Award for Best Art Direction. More importantly, Sleepy Hollow marked a key turning point. Tim Burton had fully embraced his identity as the master of Gothic fantasy. Between Mars Attacks and Sleepy Hollow, Tim Burton had proven something vital. He could take risks, even if they failed commercially. He could reclaim classic horror and make it modern. And he could balance chaos and control, turning his wildest dreams into cinematic reality. But Tim's next chapter would be something far more personal and much closer to his heart. Big Fish, The Return of Edward, and Burton's emotional evolution, 2000 to 2005. After years of stylized Gothic tales, Tim Burton made something different. Something deeply personal, gentle, and emotionally raw. That film was Big Fish. At its core, Big Fish was about a dying father, Edward Bloom, who spent his life telling tall tales of witches, giants, and magical towns to his skeptical son. But the real question lingered. Were they just stories? Or was there truth in the fantasy? The movie wasn't like Batman or Beetlejuice. It didn't have monsters or twisted sets. Instead, it had heart. It was about the stories we tell, why we tell them, and how we want to be remembered. Burton made the film just after losing his own father and mother, and Big Fish was clearly a kind of emotional processing. Starring Ewan McGregor and Albert Finney, the film balanced surreal imagery, playful fantasy, and quiet heartbreak. Audiences were moved, critics praised it, and many called it Tim Burton's most mature work yet. Before Big Fish, Tim Burton nearly made Superman Lives, a wild Superman reboot starring Nicolas Cage in a black suit. The script was insane. Brainiac was fusing with Lex Luthor. Superman had no red and blue suit. A giant mechanical spider was involved. It was all very Burton, but also very risky. Despite months of concept art, costume tests, and hype, the project was canceled. Still, the idea of a Tim Burton Superman film remains legendary in Hollywood mythology. Tim returned to familiar territory with this remake of Roald Dahl's beloved tale. But unlike the colorful 1971 version starring Gene Wilder, Burton's take was much darker, stranger, and visually bolder. Johnny Depp played Willy Wonka, but this wasn't the charming trickster of the past. This Wonka was emotionally damaged, mysterious, and deeply awkward. We also got an entirely new backstory for him, a traumatic childhood with a cold dentist father played by Christopher Lee. Some loved it, others found it unsettling, but no one could deny the look of the film. Candy-colored nightmares, mechanical squirrels singing Oompa Loompas, all played by one actor. It was a box office hit, and further proof that Burton and Depp had become a legendary duo. Right after Charlie, Burton gave fans something even more classic, a stop-motion animated gothic romance called Corpse Bride. Set in a world of death and music, the film followed Victor, a nervous groom who accidentally proposes to a dead woman instead of his fiancée. With music by Danny Elfman, haunting visuals, and a bittersweet tone, the film enchanted fans of The Nightmare Before Christmas. It was nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars, and once again, Burton had done what only he could do: make death feel beautiful, romantic, and strangely alive. Between 2000 and 2005, Tim Burton evolved. He wasn't just the weird guy who made Batman anymore. He became a storyteller of emotion and memory, Big Fish, a creator of grand visuals and complex characters, Charlie, and a defender of old-school animation and dark fantasy, Corpse Bride. These films deepened his reputation and showed that beneath the eyeliner and shadows, Tim Burton was always reaching for something very human. Sweeney Todd, Alice's Wonderland, and Burton at his peak, 2006 to 2012. Tim Burton had done creepy, he had done gothic, but he had never done full-blown musical horror. That changed with Sweeney Todd. Based on the Broadway musical by Stephen Sondheim, this was a tale of vengeance, blood, and meat pies. Lots of meat pies. Johnny Depp starred as the tortured barber, returning to London after years of exile to seek revenge on the corrupt judge who destroyed his life. His weapon, a straight razor. His partner in crime, Mrs. Lovett, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who turned his victims into meat pies. Burton fully leaned into the macabre opera of the story. Bleak, pale London streets, crimson rivers of blood, songs that bled sorrow and rage. Depp, who had never sung on screen before, surprised everyone. He even earned an Oscar nomination. Critics and fans praised the film's ambition and tone. Burton had taken a stage legend and turned it into a cinematic nightmare in the best way. Next, Burton tackled one of the most beloved and bizarre stories in literature, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. But this wasn't a simple remake. This was Burton's Wonderland, twisted, visually surreal, and emotionally deeper than most remembered. Mia Wasikowska played Alice, now a young woman returning to Underland. Yes, Underland, to find that everything had changed. Johnny Depp starred as a deeply scarred, emotionally unstable Mad Hatter, adding unexpected pain behind his wild orange hair and manic dance. Helena Bonham Carter stole scenes as the Red Queen, with her giant head and constant screams of "off with their heads." Burton created digital landscapes of impossible forests, talking animals with realistic eyes, gothic versions of classic characters like the Cheshire Cat and the White Rabbit. Critics were divided, but audiences weren't. Alice in Wonderland made over $1 billion. It became one of the highest-grossing films of all time, and proved that Burton could blend fantasy, nostalgia, and box office power. Riding high on success, Burton adapted Dark Shadows, a gothic soap opera from the 1960s that he and Depp had loved as kids. Depp played Barnabas Collins, a 200-year-old vampire awakened in 1972 to find his family estate in shambles and his descendants full of secrets. The film tried to mix comedy, horror, family dysfunction, 70s disco music. It looked amazing. It had iconic Burton style, spooky mansions, washed-out color palettes, wild costumes, but something was off. Audiences were confused by the tone. Critics were divided. While not a failure, it didn't reach the heights of Alice or Sweeney Todd. Still, it showed that Burton was unafraid to be weird, even when the world expected blockbusters. By 2012, Tim Burton was everywhere. He was winning awards, making billion-dollar films, working with Disney, Warner Bros., and major studios, and still staying true to his dark, imaginative vision. He had become more than just a director. He was a brand, an aesthetic, a symbol of gothic magic in Hollywood. But what comes after the peak? Next, Burton would return to his roots with A Dead Dog. Frankenweenie, Big Eyes, and The Search for Meaning, 2012 to 2016. Back in 1984, Burton made a live-action short film about a boy who brought his dog back to life. It was heartfelt, funny, and way too weird for Disney at the time. They fired him for it. But almost 30 years later, they welcomed him back to remake it in full stop-motion animation. This was the ultimate Burton passion project. Frankenweenie, 2012, wasn't just a remake. It was a tribute to classic monster movies, childhood innocence, and the bittersweet experience of loss. Shot entirely in black and white, it stood out in a world of flashy 3D animations. The story followed Victor Frankenstein, a shy, intelligent boy who uses science to bring his beloved dog Sparky back from the dead. Of course, chaos follows, as other kids try to recreate the experiment, leading to a town full of monstrous pets. Critics praise the film for its emotion, its visual style, and its personal connection to Burton himself. It didn't break box office records, but it reminded audiences why Burton mattered. It was weird, sweet, and full of heart. Then came a very unexpected turn. In 2014, Burton directed Big Eyes, a film with no monsters, no dark castles, no stop-motion skeletons. Instead, it told the true story of Margaret Keane, a painter whose husband took credit for her art for years. Her style? Sad children with giant haunting eyes. Her tragedy? Living in the shadow of her abusive, manipulative husband. Burton had been a longtime fan of Keane's work. He even collected her art. He saw in her story something deeply personal, the fight to keep one's voice and vision alive. Amy Adams played Margaret with quiet strength. Christoph Waltz played her husband with a disturbing mix of charm and control. It was a film about art ownership and identity. There were no ghosts, no vampires, no Johnny Depp, and yet it was still very much a Tim Burton film, just through a different lens. Big Eyes earned critical praise and award nominations. It showed that Burton could tell real human stories with the same emotional power he gave to his fantasies. By 2016, something had shifted. Burton's longtime collaboration with Helena Bonham Carter had ended. Their romantic relationship had come to a quiet close after over a decade. It was the end of an era, both professionally and personally. He had also taken a break from Johnny Depp after nearly 20 years of back-to-back films. There were questions in the industry. Was Tim Burton moving on from his gothic style? Could he stay relevant without fantasy blockbusters? Would he reinvent himself or return to his roots? The answer came in his next project. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and the Return to Fantasy, 2016 to 2019. In 2016, Tim Burton returned to the director's chair for a film that felt like classic Burton, yet also something fresh. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children was based on the best-selling novel by Ransom Riggs, a dark fantasy adventure filled with magical children, eerie time loops, and shadowy monsters. Think X-Men, but with a darker, more mysterious edge. Think Harry Potter, if it were written by Edward Gorey. The story: when teenager Jake discovers clues left by his grandfather, he travels to a hidden orphanage in Wales, a place frozen in time, home to children with strange and eerie powers. A girl lighter than air, a boy with bees in his stomach, a child who can bring inanimate things to life, and a headmistress who can turn into a falcon. Miss Peregrine, played by Ava Green. Burton brought his signature flair to the film. Twisted topiaries, Victorian fashion monsters with hollow eyes and long limbs. It was weird, it was whimsical, and it was a return to form. Though the movie received mixed reviews, many fans appreciated its creativity and visual splendor. It showed that Burton could still weave strange magic, even in a world now crowded with superhero movies and CGI epics. By this time, one name was notably absent from Burton's projects: Johnny Depp. After decades of collaboration, from Edward Scissorhands to Dark Shadows, the two had taken a break. The media speculated, was there a falling out? Was it due to Depp's controversial personal life, or simply the need for artistic space? Burton never gave a dramatic answer. He was private, as always, but insiders hinted that he wanted to explore new creative directions, try different actors, stories, and styles. Even so, his admiration for Depp remained clear. He once said, "Johnny understands misunderstood characters better than anyone." Behind the scenes, Burton was dealing with something deeper, a sense of artistic exhaustion. He had built a career on the unusual, the eccentric, the outsider, but now the world had caught up. Being weird was no longer, well, weird. Gothic was mainstream. Supernatural was everywhere. He began questioning, was his style still unique? Could he still surprise people? What stories were left to tell? It was during this soul-searching that a surprising opportunity came his way, one that would bring him full circle. Dumbo, the elephant in the room. 2019. In 2019, Tim Burton took on one of the most iconic Disney classics for a live-action remake, Dumbo, the story of a flying elephant with enormous ears. This was more than just a children's tale for Burton. It was a chance to blend his trademark Gothic whimsy with a story about inclusion, family, and courage. Dumbo wasn't a monster or an outsider because of some curse or magic. He was different because of nature itself. And Burton saw in this a metaphor for anyone who ever felt out of place. Unlike many big-budget remakes, Burton infused Dumbo with a bittersweet, melancholic tone. Gone were the bright, colorful cartoons. In came muted, foggy circus tents and dusty carnival grounds. He created a living, breathing circus world full of grimy tents and wagons, wandering performers with haunted eyes, children longing for magic in hard times. Colin Farrell starred as a World War I veteran struggling to keep his family together. Michael Keaton was the cynical circus owner, embodying the harsh realities behind the show. Dumbo's CGI effects were stunning, bringing the elephant's expressive eyes and delicate movements to life. Burton's Dumbo was more than just spectacle. It was deeply emotional. It explored themes of family bonds forged in adversity, prejudice faced by the different, the power of belief and hope in dark times. Critics noted how the film captured both the wonder and the sadness of circus life. Though it didn't break box office records, Dumbo resonated with many as a heartfelt, mature fairy tale. Dumbo marked a turning point for Burton, a return to Disney, his old stomping ground, a more grounded, emotional style, alongside his signature surrealism, a willingness to tackle complex human themes through fantasy. This balance between magic and reality would define his next projects and show he was far from done evolving. The modern era, innovation, streaming, and new horizons, 2020 and beyond. The 2000s brought major shifts in the film industry. Streaming platforms exploded, theatrical releases faced challenges, and creators had to adapt fast. Tim Burton, ever the visionary, embraced these changes with a mix of curiosity and determination. One of Burton's biggest recent successes came with the Netflix series Wednesday, centered on Wednesday Addams, the darkly witty daughter of the iconic Addams family. This show was a perfect storm, a beloved gothic character, a new younger audience, Burton's signature style and storytelling. Jenna Ortega's portrayal of Wednesday was critically acclaimed, smart, deadpan, and magnetic. The show combined mystery, supernatural elements, teen drama, dark humor, all with that unmistakable Burton vibe. It became a massive hit, proving Burton could thrive on streaming platforms and connect with a whole new generation. Beyond films and shows, Burton continued to explore his art in other forms. Exhibitions showcasing his drawings, sculptures, and paintings, collaborations in theater and fashion, publishing graphic novels and storybooks. His creativity remains vibrant, constantly pushing boundaries between dark fantasy and raw human emotion. The modern era hasn't been without hurdles. Some projects faced delays or cancellations. The pandemic impacted filming and releases. Audience tastes continue evolving rapidly, but Burton's resilience shines through. He adapts, experiments, and remains unapologetically himself. What's next for Tim Burton? New films blending classic Gothic with modern storytelling, potential collaborations with emerging talent, continued exploration of themes like identity, otherness, and imagination. One thing is certain, Tim Burton's world of dark wonder and haunting beauty is far from finished. From a shy boy fascinated by monsters and magic to a global icon redefining fantasy cinema, Tim Burton's journey is a testament to the power of imagination. His stories remind us that being different is a gift, and that beauty often hides in the shadows. From the shadows of a quiet childhood to the dazzling lights of Hollywood, Tim Burton's story teaches us one vital lesson. Our uniqueness is our greatest strength. He transformed the strange, the misunderstood, and the eerie into unforgettable art that touches millions worldwide. His movies aren't just stories. They are invitations to celebrate. Imagination without limits. The beauty of being different. Courage to follow your own path. No matter how unconventional, Tim Burton shows us that embracing our quirks and fears can create something truly magical. He reminds every dreamer, artist, and outsider that their voice matters. So whether you're watching his films or walking your own journey, remember, it's the weird, the wonderful, and the wildly creative who change the world. Thank you for joining this exploration of a visionary mind. Keep dreaming, keep creating, and never be afraid to be yourself.